Well, farmers, my ancient adversaries, I come for you once again to show you the error of your ways. Why? For the love of God, did 82% of you vote for Donald Trump? It makes no sense to me, right? The thing about living in a rural life is you always tend to be around people who understand your life because everyone lives a very common life, right? It's a hard-working, blue-collar life for most people, unless you work at a school or an administrative office somewhere. But usually you're in a town of 2,000 to 8,000 people, and everyone kind of knows everyone in one way or another. So why would you think that the person who would represent your interests most is somebody who can never, in their farthest dream, actually understand or identify the life or lifestyle in which you live? Boggles the mind. But here's 5 reasons why these guys actually voted for Donald Trump, and let's talk about it. 1, the belief in long-term patriotism over short-term pain. For most people who don't understand, farmers have always kind of scratched out a living, but are mostly paycheck to paycheck. They're all subsidized and in debt for the most part, and always on the verge of losing their farm. So, I find it very interesting. I think a lot of people with logical brains actually find it quite interesting that you chose somebody who told you that they were going to enact tariffs on the people that you do business with, and that they would force those countries to actually pay for those tariffs, but that's not how tariffs work. Tariffs are paid by the consumer. That's me. That's you. Any part of any machine, tractor, combine, whatever it is, right? For the most part, it comes in internationally, right? And that means that you have to pay a markup on it. In most of the case, it comes from China, which means that in some cases you had anywhere between a 35% to a 100% tariff on these things. That's a 35 to 100% increase that you have to pay for it. Of course, for people who are living on slim margins in life, like 65% of Americans are, but more than that when it comes to farmers, you might think that it's a kind of offing yourself financially to do that. And you'd be absolutely justified in thinking that, because it is. It's not good for the farmer. It's a terrible thing. Number 2, government bailouts, subsidies, and the social safety net. Farming is the most subsidized population sector in the United States by far. In some rural areas, up to 70% of people are actually benefiting from the social safety net in some kind of a way, whether that's rental assistance, whether that's food stamps, CHIP, WIC, Medicare, Medicaid. This hits people in the rural areas the hardest because in the rural areas, it's the least money, the least paying jobs, which means that the requirement for the social safety net is its highest. But the people that you voted for told you that it was actually not good for you. That's actually bankrupting our country and that it's causing inflation. But inflation doesn't come from Medicare. Inflation doesn't come from government food assistance. Inflation doesn't come from providing free lunches for children who are going through childhood food insecurity. It doesn't. You have been fooled. And this hits rural areas the hardest. Childhood food insecurity is something that deeply bothers me because I believe that in a first world nation, no child should go hungry. They shouldn't go to school hungry. They shouldn't come home and worry if there's actually going to be food in the pantry, on the table. That's just not something we should concern ourselves about. Not when we have the obesity levels that we have in our country, when we have the vastness of our agriculture and arable lands in our country. No one should go hungry. But again, that's what farmers voted for. They voted for that because they were told that this was bad for America, that the support that you're getting, the support that your family's getting, the support that your elders are getting is actually bad for the country. And you just need to find another way. Now, we're not going to tell you what that way is. We're just going to cut them, right? But it's okay. Trust us. Trust the government. If there's one thing that befuddles me the most is that the rural area generally is a population of people who don't trust the government. They don't want the government to get involved in their matters. But now when your boy is up there, for some reason you're like, this works out. But at the same time, you guys are on the news, you guys are on TikTok, you guys are on YouTube talking about how you're about to lose your farms. Number 3, social conservatism and cultural resonance. The deep red Bible Belt of America believes in Christianity, but not just any Christianity, American Protestantism. And the only person who apparently represented that during the last race happened to be a philandering con man who's cheated on pretty much every one of his wives, even when they were pregnant, and apparently was an active participant in redlining. Listen, Not exactly the best case for a representative of the church, in my opinion, but hey, what do I know? I'm just a gentle Catholic. The thing is, small towns and rural areas and agricultural lands are dying, right? Because the farms are being bought up by the corporations, because the farms just aren't able to make enough money to actually pay their rents on the lands. Inputs are too much and the outputs are too low. It's as simple as that. And you had Big Daddy Trump come in and made the big promise that he was going to turn things around in that small town. But as soon as you elected him into office, he went ahead and turned away from all that. Focus on the oligarchs, focus on the billionaires, focus on the CEOs, and focus on big manufacturing that's in cities and not in rural populations. In fact, what we've seen is nothing but plants and food processing and all manner of industries get shut down one after the other, just decimating local populations in rural towns. The culture actually meant nothing. It meant nothing. Right? Your traditions mean nothing. It's what you're able to produce. And that's how America works. That's how that party works at the moment. And just 82% of the people fell lockstep in with that. 82%. That's wild to me. Now, I've talked a lot of trash on the rural areas and on the farming communities in general, even though, hey, my family comes from that. I understand, right? But that's one of the things about being so isolated from the rest of the world, is that you don't understand the rest of the world. The big economic matters, even though you think your farm is a big economy, it's a very complicated, small economy. But on a grand scale, your farm can easily be sacrificed for profit when that land can be sold and bought up by a bigger corporation that is more heavily subsidized, and you're just going to have to move to the suburbs somewhere and get a job at Starbucks. Number 4, distrust in Democrats, in rural neglect. There's no trust that the rural people, the American red hats, have with the Democrats. And honestly, I understand this. The left has always demonized the right, and the right has always demonized the left. And the left, over the past decade that I've actually been watching them, has really turned a blind eye to any kind of tragedy that happens to the rural area, to the flyover states, And it's sad, and it can cause resentment, and that resentment certainly did fester, especially when the person who you think is standing for you uses so much invective and hyperbole to demonize that side. The Democrats certainly did shoot themselves in the foot with that demographic. They should. And it's one of my big critiques of the Democratic Party is it really had failed to encapsulate all the woes of the working class. Only segments of that working class. So when Trump came around, he promised the farmers that, hey, these people have turned against you, but you can trust me. I'm not a known con man. I'm not a known con man or snake oil salesman. No, I haven't spent my entire life shitting into a gold toilet. I know exactly what you're going through. But as I've said before, a drowning man will grab onto whatever ship that sails by. And Donald Trump had a big sail, and it had his name on it, like everything else. Number 5. Economic despair, populist promises. Listen, the economies of the small towns have been crumbling, like I've said, and people have been fleeing them left and right to actually seek some kind of promise and profit in pursuit of the American dream somewhere closer to the cities, because that's where the actual good paying jobs are. They're not in rural areas unless you're working on an oil rig. But when you're, again, living in isolation, you have to find a boogeyman. And a lot of these places have rarely ever seen a person of color or an immigrant, even though a lot of these farms will use undocumented workers to actually do the work on these farms. At the same time, they were told that these people are actually the ones stealing all the jobs that these same farmers are hiring, which are one of the reasons that we don't have jobs in those areas, because you found a cheaper workforce to use. Again, this is kind of the farmer's fault here, right? You got so dependent on cheap labor, but at the same time, you swallowed this pill that all the woes of America is because of immigrants, that I don't see how you didn't see the negative consequences of that. I just don't see it. It doesn't make sense to me. You'd have to make it make sense to me. It's because you all felt that they were criminals. You all thought that they were bad people. If you all thought they were bad people, then why were you hiring them on your farms? Why were you having them close to your families? Why were you going to baseball games with them and having family picnics and inviting them over while at the same time voting to have them kicked out of the country? That shows the quality of character of a lot of these people. I understand that people have regrets and decisions that they've made, and that's something that you're going to have to come to really understand within yourself. But the people who still stand by all those decisions, as we've seen parents hauled away from baseball games and graduations, doors kicked in, children left on the streets screaming as their parents are taken to some gulag in El Salvador. Is that the kind of populism you supported? Did you think that that was going to help your local economy when you're driving out your workforce and the average age of people who actually live in small towns are getting older and older because there's no jobs there, which means the only people who are left behind to actually do the work are old people? Because the destruction of the family isn't just a city thing. It's something that's happened worldwide, and there's no family farms where you can just bring the cousins in and do the work, right? Do some bean walks, pick some corn. That's not how it works anymore. The farmers were given a choice. They said, in the long term, we're going to help you out. We're not going to tell you what that plan is. We're just going to say the economy is going to do well. There's going to be some pain on the short term. And I don't think they really realized that that pain was actually going to be carried by them. I don't. So, of course, I'll have empathy because a desperate man is going to do desperate things, and the desperate people do terrible things sometimes. But at the same time, the kind of empathy that you're going to get from the wider public, you're going to find lacking. Because in the end, you got what you voted for. So that's 5 reasons that farmers voted for Donald Trump. It makes sense. At the same time, it doesn't make sense. The consequences are definitely being felt by them. It is what it is. And at some point in the future, hey, maybe everything will smoothen out and that'll be good. I hope this country comes together. But by God, hey, you reap what you sow. Farmers, have a good one.